Hi there, and welcome to the HR Podcast. This is Linda, Misegadis.
And Cyndi Manuel, and we'll be your co-hosts. After spending years working in and with HR, we thought, why not start a podcast to support the important HR community? We believe the way things have always been done isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. So we're diving into topics that support HR and working women as they navigate the future of work. We're talking about professional growth and also how we can support each other as human beings.
We can't wait to bring you insights from HR experts, thought leaders, and inspiring women who are making a real difference in their organization and communities. They'll share their journeys and tips on balancing work and life in a better way. We're excited to learn alongside you and hope you'll pick up some great takeaways from tips and tricks to worksheets that you can actually use in your daily life. So grab your favorite beverage
or lace up your walking shoes and join us for the HR Her Resources podcast.
Hey, Cyndi, it's so good to see you again.
Thank you. It's so good to see you too.
Oh,
it's always good to see you.
It's always good to see you too.
Your hair, you're having a great hair day today.
Thank you. Thank you. It is my best feature is my hair. So I'm glad that's what you can see.
It's lovely.
Well, you too are having a nice hair day as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I do love it. It's beautiful. Blondes are
just
best.
Got it done yesterday. So.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. No, I finally started going again. Pre-COVID, I barely went. And then post-COVID, I hadn't gone at all. And so I've had 2 haircuts since then. It's like kind of easing myself back into the whole hair care thing. So, but
it's very serious stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Well, how was your week? How have you been doing?
Really good, very busy.
Yeah.
Things have been going great. I'm actually going to start coaching a client
on
change management this next week, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always love the one-to-one kind of interaction. And
no, that's great. Now, is it, are you able to do that remote or do you have to travel on site?
We'll do it remote, but there may be times where we can get together. She lives in Colorado as well, but much further south.
Okay. Yeah.
But, from time to time, it'd be fun to get together because it's that in person is a little different,
yeah, it really is.
Remote.
I do so much better if I'm doing any type of like trying to be strategic or working through that. I have to do it in person. I'm terrible at remote strategy. I try and do it with my team, and I'm just like, just not very good.
Easier
we all need to
read
get together.
The room, I think.
I think you're right. Yeah, you got to see the body language. Plus, I know for me, if I'm remote, I'm not paying any attention. I'm usually multitasking. I've got both my monitors up, and I probably have my phone, so I'm getting text messages, IMs, so I'm not paying attention, which means I'm not very engaged. So no, very good.
How was your week been?
It was good. I mean, it's been a crazy week for sure. We were in Chicago. Unfortunately, we got home before that crowd strike and all the systems went down. So, but it was a lot of fun and it was nice. We got to see some family while we were out there and that was fun. And it's
nice
always, oh my goodness, it's always nice when you have that opportunity. And then we got the chance to, I always enjoy seeing all the state personnel executives. Because it just gives you such a good perspective on what's going on in government HR. And, so that was a lot of fun. And I'm just kind of thinking about all the topics that are happening. And so it was nice. We did have some crazy weather there, though. They had tornado warnings.
I heard about that.
Yeah, it was nuts. And my husband and I were in a high-rise hotel, so we're on the 35th floor of this hotel.
The worst place.
The worst place you could be. And of course, it always happened at like 10 o'clock at night that we're getting these alarms. And no guidance from the hotel or anything like that. So we're like, should we do something?
Maybe go to a lower floor.
Go in the hallway, something, I don't know. And so it was a little exciting to go through all of that.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, it was all fine. I mean, just a little crazy light show and all that good jazz.
Wow.
So yeah, it was nuts, but it was fun. It's always nice when my husband can come with me on a business trip too, because it gives us a chance to kind of catch up and do that. So
have dinner together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was nice. So we enjoyed it. It was a good time. So
good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I'm excited about our session today because we're going to be talking about some of my favorite things, which is really around strategy. And
Yeah.
so that's a key component. And then really thinking about leadership and innovation because those come directly into what we're
Hand in
doing from a
hand.
strategy perspective.
Mhm.
And this time we're going to talk a little bit more. So we love to throw the word strategy around. I mean, that I remember I had somebody who told me, Linda, if I hear you say strategy one more time, I'm like, I don't even know what you mean by strategy. And I thought, wow, how fascinating that was, that because it just seems so natural to me. But I thought, you know what? We do throw that term around all the time. What
Yeah.
exactly does it mean when we're talking about strategy? And then
Yeah.
thinking about what is a strategic HR business partner? What does that actually mean? And kind of funny, as I was researching for this episode, it's still today, 57% of C suite executives still view HR as a predominantly administrative function. They're still
Over
seeing
half.
over half.
That is so
Isn't that
disappointing.
crazy? I know. I'm like, as
Yes.
far as we've come, and yet
Yeah.
that's how they're still viewing it. And they said
Wow.
that there's still too much focus on the day-to-day tasks
Mhm.
and failing to consider the bigger picture and the
Mm.
company's strategic direction. So I thought, well, how wonderful for
Interesting.
us to really kind of talk about this and dig in a little
Makes
bit.
it that much more important, doesn't
It
it?
really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really does. And
Yeah.
so I'm just curious, from your perspective, like how do you view
Mm.
what is your definition of like a strategic HR business partner?
Yeah, and I think you can't take away some of those tactical things
Yes,
because the
yeah.
business
You,
needs it,
you still
right?
are going to have operational. There's HR generalists, right? So you're always going to
Absolutely.
need them, and we don't want to imply that somehow, all
All
of
that
that work
goes away.
magically gets
Yeah,
done. It still has
absolutely.
to be completed, and everybody has a role. But when
Yes,
you think about that there needs to be both parts of it, right? Both the
that's right.
strategy and the tactical sides of that. So
So we're asking even more from our HR folks,
yes,
right?
we are
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
no.
And I love too that in the future we can bring in some additional support on how to do that,
Yes,
right? Because
absolutely.
I remember, and I think I shared this with you on our last episode, that when I remember sitting around a table with a new HR leader who came in and said, we are not just going to be tactical. We're not
Yes,
just going to be
yeah.
administrative.
Yep.
We are going to be strategic. And the
Absolutely.
look of fear on some of the people's faces
Oh, I'm
in
sure.
HR around the
Yeah.
room, and then followed quickly by some resistance from some
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
For me, I was like, let's build the plane while we're flying this thing.
Yeah.
Let's
No.
figure this out. But it does take a lot, and you do kind of feel like an imposter because if you have not
Yes.
had a seat at the
It's very
C-suite
true.
table
Yeah.
previously,
Yeah.
and to your point with that statistic, the
Mhm.
viewpoint still is, oh, these are administrative
Yep.
functions or
Yep.
operational
We'll push
functions,
down
and
the decisions that we make and those people can
they'll
go
take it and
and
run
take
with
it and,
it.
and do the administrative
Yes.
functions. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, I think that makes a big difference. Well, and I'm kind of curious too. That's an interesting thing that you just said that around that is because a lot of people who are in HR today didn't necessarily go to school to be in HR. I think, you're seeing a little bit more of that focus. But I mean, back in the day, you really didn't see a lot of HR focus in school, right? I mean, you could
Yeah.
do your psychology or those sorts of things, but most people who worked in HR had no
Hmm.
real background in
In
any of those
HR.
things, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I moved from a receptionist position, and the manager of HR for a
Yeah.
company I worked for years and years ago came up to me and said, you're great with people. Are you interested in getting into human resources? So it
Yeah.
wasn't like you've just completed your bachelor's in
Right.
human
Yes,
resources or,
yes, yeah.
any of that. It's do you want to move into an HR role? And I thought, yeah, because I feel like I can have more of an impact on all
Right.
these people in the organization that I really care about.
Yeah.
And so to kind of get back to what you were talking about, there's a lot that's involved with strategy and
Yes.
um, it shouldn't all fall on HR, but HR are
Right.
definitely looked at or should be looked
Yeah,
at more
yeah.
than 57%, I would say,
Right.
as thought leaders, right? So
Yes.
when you think about the whole employee life cycle,
Mhm.
so attracting and recruiting talent,
Right.
the talent acquisition and the management of talent,
Yeah.
performance management,
Yeah.
succession planning. I mean, you had
Yes.
a statistic we were talking about a little bit ago around, people succeeding or the
Yes,
succession,
that
right?
most
Within
CHROs are hired outside of an
external.
organization. So they're not even hiring from internal, which means there's no succession plan, which means there's no
Hmm.
growth for those people who have dedicated their career into HR to kind of
Yes.
move up into those roles. So yeah, you're right.
And who
Yeah.
already love and care about the
Yes,
organization. Maybe love
yeah.
is a little
You're
strong,
right,
but
yes.
I'm a little woo woo.
Absolutely. Yep.
But who definitely care and align with the organization. So
Yeah.
why not grow those individuals because they understand
Yeah.
if they've been a part of the organization, sort of what makes the organization tick.
Yeah,
So
and usually they've been on the front lines too,
that's
right? So
right.
they have a unique perspective that
Absolutely.
is generally missing at the C level. And I think that that's an important piece too, because one of the things that they talked about, almost 15% of CHROs in publicly traded companies now make one of the top 5 salaries in their executive suites. I know that Jack Welch said that CHROs are like the number two, should be the number two in a
Absolutely.
company. But the interesting thing to me about that is that CHROs, again, we only think about who's at the very top, right? But who's doing all the work? Like it's the business partner, right? It's the
Yeah,
strategic
very
business
important
partner. So
role.
I think that that could be a problem in all of this as we're looking at it as well. If the focus is only at the CHRO level and they're hiring them in externally, then how is that all going to work together in developing a
Really good
strategy? You
point.
know, I mean,
Really
because we
good
do put
point.
way too much emphasis on the C suite and
Mhm.
not enough on the,
Business
kind of, yeah, getting the
partners.
feedback from those business
Yeah.
partners who, if they're doing their job, well, and they're viewed as strategic business partners, probably have a pretty good pulse on what's happening in the business.
Yeah. So that's a great point. I think it is not just at the C level.
Yeah.
It's an entire team, right? That
Yes.
your HR community within your organization. The other thing that happened at this organization where you and I were, and it was a
Hmm.
high tech company, but also manufacturing was a big part
Yeah.
of it, right?
Yeah.
And so she sort of challenged us to get a seat at the table with
Yeah.
your respective VPs of
Ah,
each area of
yes.
the
Yeah.
business. And I was the HR business partner for manufacturing, which I absolutely loved. And so I
Yes.
went to this guy, I'll never forget him, Dave Weishar,
Yeah.
and went to him and said, Dave, I'd really like a seat at the table during your leadership meetings each week. And
Right.
he looked at me and he said, do you think that you should be there? And I said, I absolutely think. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, I don't know what I'm going to,
Right, right.
I don't know
Yes,
how
I
this
should
is
be
all
there.
going
I
to
don't know
work.
how, but it's that fake it
Yeah.
till you make it, right?
Yeah. And so he goes, okay, we have him on Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock. Be there. And every week I learned more about the business, not just
Yeah.
manufacturing, but
Right,
about the
right.
business.
Yeah,
But to me, manufacturing was the hub, right? If we did not
absolutely.
make a good product,
Yeah,
there was nothing to
that's
sell.
right.
We had no business. And
Yeah,
so I learned so much about the business that way.
yeah,
And I was able to talk to the employees and I was able to walk the manufacturing floor and
right.
kind of came into my own as an HR business partner that way
Yeah,
and would feed that information. Then, meeting with my HR community
right.
with the CHRO, sort of fed that information back. All right, here's how manufacturing is feeling. Here's
Yeah,
some things I think we should do to support them.
I like that.
If we can provide some development, can we
Right.
provide some celebration at the end of a
Yeah,
quarter and
yeah.
things like that. And so I do think there is a role, definitely there's a role for the HR business partner as well.
Absolutely. Well, and the another interesting thing I found through all of that, which I'll be curious to get your thoughts on as well, is that in reading about this, it's usually only in organizations with over 10,000 employees that they really kind of even view strategic HR
Ah,
business partner. And first of all, there are not that many companies
oh,
out there
many
with over
companies.
10,000
Yeah.
employees, right? And why would you think that strategy would only be at that level? You would think that you would, I mean, yes, we've both worked for companies that size, but we've also worked for smaller
That's
organizations.
right.
And sometimes strategy is way more important in those smaller mid-sized businesses than even at the large company, level. It's like they're all important, but it's a different type of approach in that
Isn't that
middle
how they
market.
grow? I mean,
That's
don't
how
you
you
need a
become that over
strategy?
10,000, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It feels
Yeah.
to me like a big missed opportunity.
I
And
think so
I don't
too.
think it should depend on the number of employees, but that's
Yes.
fascinating.
Right? I mean, that you would
10,000.
think like 10,000 is your litmus test
10,000.
to say that that's when strategy
That's
comes into
no.
play. It was just really pretty amazing to me around that. I'm
Yeah.
curious, as you were doing some research as well, Josh Bersin has some interesting thoughts on this, as well as Dave
Yeah.
Ulrich. And I'm curious, like, what did you find when you were kind of reading about them? Because I think both of them are definitely focused in more on changing the role of HR
Mhm.
and moving them into being viewed as more strategic business partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Josh Bersin, some of the references that he made, first of all, and I think we mentioned this on our last episode, was really who does HR report into?
Oh,
Historically,
yeah.
the CFO,
Yep,
right? And
yep.
you and I kind of experienced
Yes, we
that.
did. Yeah.
But now it really should be the CEO. It really should be the person who oversees the entire business.
Right.
And because if you're going to run your business,
Mhm.
who's the most important, right? You have no
Yeah,
business if you don't have people.
that is true.
So,
Yes,
your HR person. So
absolutely.
one of the things that Josh Bersin said, which I think he is a really good thought leader
Yeah, I
on
think
all
so
of this
too.
stuff,
Yeah.
was, HR has become more strategic, including leadership models and development.
Yeah,
And that's one of the top two that I've seen in more than one
absolutely.
survey,
Yep.
about what HR can sort of bring to the organization. It's that and change management, but
Right.
leadership development, huge, huge.
Absolutely.
Um, a hybrid and remote work.
Yes.
Now that we're 4 years away
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
from the pandemic, people are starting to understand where you can
Yeah.
bring people back into the office
Yeah.
2 to 3 days a week,
Absolutely.
and to
Yes.
what we were talking about
Yep.
before when you
Sometimes
are
you need a
face
little
to
FaceTime.
face.
Yep. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even just those water cooler moments, you
Absolutely. It
know?
fosters a community when you have the opportunity to see one another.
That's right.
And so, yeah, I do think that that is so. And I think that there's more recognition over the idea that you can have a hybrid environment, and
Yeah.
still be productive and still foster a positive culture. Like it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be all one or the other. It
Mhm.
can be a hybrid of both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so HR, again, can really facilitate, coach managers on,
Yes.
because it's a challenge.
It is very
How do I
challenging.
manage someone or a team who is remote, who is
Yes.
fully on site? So we go back to manufacturing. They can't
Yeah.
do their jobs remotely.
No, they
So,
cannot. Yeah.
remote folks like field sales or,
Right.
on site like manufacturing. And
Yeah.
then those hybrid remote or hybrid roles
Yeah.
that can come in sort of like HR is a great example
They
of
are a
one of
great
those,
example. Yeah, because
right?
that's another role. Doesn't have to be in the office all the time,
That's
but
right.
does need to be there
To
sometimes
see
to have that
people
touch
to
point. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
No, it makes a
Yes.
big difference.
Yeah. So mergers and acquisitions, we're hearing
Yes.
more and more of
Yeah.
that. I hear that
Absolutely.
every day almost. You hear in the
For
healthcare
sure.
industry that, these networks of hospitals are
Yeah.
bringing in more.
That's
And
true.
so you're talking about combining cultures
Yes.
and you're talking about combining even systems and things like that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
all of that is something where HR absolutely needs a seat at the table.
Agree.
Productivity improvement projects, setting up a performance culture, like
Yes.
what does that mean? And,
Right.
so HR kind of having a say in that and
Yeah.
being able to sort of liaise between all the leaders
Right.
and facilitate those conversations, but also back to what you were saying, HR business partners talking to people, pulse checking,
Yes.
seeing how people are doing with these
Right.
kinds of things. What are they looking for? What are the pain points of the organization? Because it's going
Yeah.
to be more than business and
It
technology. It's
is.
going to be also on the people side.
Absolutely. And I think that's even more true, right, post COVID, because
Yes.
people's thought around their job has changed
Mhm.
drastically, and the expectation of their employer has changed quite a bit as well.
Yes.
And they're not willing to compromise like they used to. That whole
Yeah.
work life separation, because I know, like, when I was coming up, I know when you didn't bring your personal life to
No.
work. And as a woman, you definitely did not, because you didn't want to say, you didn't call in and say, I have a sick child. You called in and said you were sick that day,
Yeah.
because you didn't want to to say, because then they might perceive that as your inability to do your job because you have to be a
Yeah.
mother and take care of your child, and those type, or take care of a sick parent or even a sick
Right.
spouse for that matter. None of that stuff was okay back then. You didn't
Right.
bring that into it. Was very separate, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Even I just need a mental health day.
Yes, yeah, I would
That
have
would
never
have
thought of
been
saying that to my
taboo.
boss. I mean, even today, I would still struggle with the idea because I'm still a little old school in that thought. But I love that my employees will say to me,
Yes.
I need a mental health day, and I'm like, and on the inside, I'm fighting myself because there's a part of me that's like, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard of. But I get it. And I wish that, maybe I would have been courageous enough to say to my boss, hey, I need a mental health day today. So
Yeah.
it has changed with all of that, that blending of your life with your work, because we do spend most of our time at work. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so, again, going back to HR, HR a lot of times keeps up with those kinds of trends,
Yes.
those
Yeah.
kinds of pivots and shifts. And I think it's all for the better that these
Absolutely.
things are happening because it is a more
I
holistic
think
kind
so
of a,
too. Yeah.
life. It's not
Yeah.
all about work.
Absolutely.
But it
Yes.
also then makes it that much more imperative that where you work, and I hear this a lot now too,
Hmm.
I need to feel aligned. The values
Yeah.
that I have, I need to feel aligned with where I work,
Right.
and I love that.
Me too.
You hear so many more people saying that, and people
Yes,
are
especially the
voting with their feet
generations that are
now.
coming up now, in
Absolutely.
this multi-generational workforce, you do
Yeah.
see and hear more of that very mission-focused, purposeful
Yes.
type of approach. And yes, like-minded, which is where the whole equity, inclusion, and belonging kind of comes into
Yes.
everything, is that you want to work for an organization where you do feel comfortable being yourself. And
Yeah.
and so, yeah, aligning with all of that, again, a
Purpose.
very important role for human resources to play in all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, like if I asked you what was your favorite company that you ever worked for, or tell me the top
Yeah.
two. Anyone that you ask that to can think about those, and it's because they aligned with the purpose and the values
100%
and
agree
things
with
like
you.
that,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
But there are always going to be managers who are like, "Nope, just come to work and do your job. I don't wanna hear
Yes.
anything." So again, HR coaches those
Yes.
managers,
Yes.
gives some guidance to those leaders and
Absolutely.
or says, "You know what? You're probably not a good fit for this
Right. And
organization."
being okay to say that too,
Mhm.
because that's been a big part of it too, right? Is that the only way to grow in your career was to be a manager.
Right.
Maybe you don't wanna be a manager. Maybe you don't really like people that much,
Maybe you shouldn't be a
Maybe you
manager.
shouldn't be a manager, because I know I've had many of them where I was like, "Maybe you shouldn't be in this
Yeah.
role." But, being able to look at that, and you're right, have those hard conversations and provide that. And if you are going to have managers, then HR building those programs in place
Yes.
in order to train in managers, because most of the time, how many times were you just dropped into a manager role and nobody told you anything? They just were like, "You're
Right.
excellent at your job. Guess what? You're now the manager." And
Ta-da.
you're like, "Oh, thanks. I've never managed people before. I have no idea what to do here." And you find yourself in a very uncomfortable position sometimes. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The Delta Principal is proud to sponsor the HR Her Resources podcast. If your organization is embarking on a digital transformation or navigating organizational change, the Delta Principal is here to support you. With over 17 years of expertise in organizational change management, we're eager to collaborate, educate, and partner with you to ensure a successful transformation. We now also offer personalized change management coaching and classes tailored for employees on navigating change and for leaders on effectively leading change. Please reach out to us by emailing info at thedeltaprincipal.com. And please follow us on LinkedIn.
Well, Cindy, you had a couple of really interesting quotes as we think about like the people side of all of this. So I knew you pulled those out, and you've also just got some great isms that I use all the time. They're my Cindy isms that I still incorporate. Like my favorite one, especially in the world these days that we're living in, with a lot of layoffs and rifts happening in technology companies, is that those who can swim will jump ship first. And that's one of my favorite ones. And I share that with senior leadership all the the time because it's really important for them to recognize your best people will be the ones who will jump because
Yeah.
if they have fear and uncertainty, they're going to go because they'll land somewhere else. So it's okay for them. You'll end up with all of those that are just clinging
Not
to the
good
boat.
swimmers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they know they aren't going to necessarily land in another great company like that.
Well, and that brings up a really good point too. So, I think you can look at HR from a proactive,
Yeah.
strategic
Yes.
perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, what can we put into place to keep our good people, to
Yeah.
make sure the right people are in the right seats or in the right roles,
Right.
to support them, and growth doesn't always have to be vertical. It can be
Right.
horizontal,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
you know what, Linda, you're awesome. We've got a project coming up. Let's give you a stretch goal. We'd like for you
Yeah.
to be involved in this
Yep.
project, things like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So, as opposed to when you need them on the
Yeah.
back end, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
is where you then go back to them and say, oh my goodness, legally, compliance,
Right.
what is the
Yes.
risk? What do
Yes.
we need to do? How do what do we need to do to either get these people to where we need them to get to,
Right.
or
Right.
we need to part ways with this person?
It's so true. I think I can't remember if it was last summer or the summer before, I got the opportunity to go to the Berkeley School of Executive
Mm.
Business
Wow.
Management. Yeah, it was such an amazing opportunity to be able to do that. Plus, it was cool to be on the college campus and be a part of all of that.
Yeah.
But the big conversation or the buzzword at the time was VUCA. Have you heard of that? Like we're living in a VUCA world now. But one of the things that I found so interesting about that, as we think about the volatility and the uncertainty and what companies are going through, is that I was just reading this as well the other day. They said that the typical organizational structure is changing as well. And we're
Mm.
starting to see kind of more of a flattening of the
Uh-huh.
organization, right? Because also, and I wonder if this factors into it a little bit, is that maybe generationally, the
Mm.
idea of that old hierarchy, because like, again, coming up, you had a chain of command
I
and
reported into this person who
yes.
reported into this
Exactly.
yes,
And I remember a couple
absolutely.
times in my career where I chose to jump that chain and I did pay the price for it. I mean, it goes sometimes good, sometimes bad. But we had a chain and you were expected to kind of follow that. That's not the environment that we're in
I'm
today,
noticing that
right? Are you
too,
starting
which
to see more of that?
yeah, which I
Yeah,
think is great because
I
then
do too.
again, it's not you have to move into a leadership role of some sort,
Right,
right? A
right. Yeah.
manager, supervisor, director, what have you.
Yeah.
It's a what else can you do in your,
Yes.
what other skills do you have that we can
Right.
tap into? And I think going back to being strategic, it's just shift in the mindset.
Right.
And I think the best HR people that I have seen, and even though I'm not in HR anymore,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
best people that I get to work with,
Right.
in what I do now, they're the ones who are very innovative.
Well, I was going to ask you that because the thing that I found interesting about that, even that training that I went to, we were all director level or above people who were at this. There was nobody there from HR.
Mm,
And then as I think
interesting.
about too, the training that occurs a lot of times is done through organizational development, right?
Yes.
And so again, not necessarily the HR business partner. These are people who are trained in doing organizational development. What are we doing for our HR people though? So like are we
Right.
training them? So as organizations are changing, as we're becoming more flat, they talk about VUCA, they talk about this,
Mm.
all of these sorts of things. We
All
throw
these
around strategy,
changes.
what are
Yeah.
we doing for our HR people? How are we
Great
helping
question.
them
Yeah.
stay because we expect them to lead the organization and lead the people and yet what are we doing to ensure that they
Yeah.
have the proper skills and backgrounds in order to be able to, what are we doing to help them be prepared for the future as well, I guess. So,
Yeah. So, and I would say, some people will say, "Oh, you go to college and get your HR degree,"
yep.
right?
And I would disagree with that,
I
but
would
yep.
too. I mean, it's for those people who have and are, that's
Yes.
great. That is
Highly
a part
commendable.
of the equation,
Yes.
right? So I'll just be honest, I took HR classes when I
Yeah.
was in HR and I
Right.
became very disillusioned because I
Yes.
thought, this sounds really great in theory.
Yeah.
In practice, this is not at all what happens.
No, it isn't.
This might be some guidelines.
Yep.
This is not this is not reality.
No.
So I think the best things are things like what we're doing here, right?
Yeah,
So we're hopefully bringing together a community of people who can support each other.
absolutely.
You and I don't know everything
Oh
about
gosh, no.
HR, even though
Yeah.
we've been in
Yeah, we've been doing it
HR
for a
and
long
doing it
time.
for
Yeah.
right. But I think there's something to being curious
Yes.
and being willing to kind of again build the plane
Right.
as you're flying
Right,
it,
right.
but
Yeah.
bringing in other people to be able to share their experiences, to share their stories,
Yeah.
to be able to say, you know what, we tried this, and let me tell you
Yes.
what worked really well, and
I
let me tell you what
totally
were
agree.
total landmines.
Yes,
You
because
know?
we've all been through that, right?
Yes,
And I think that that's really important. And I agree with you. I think even as you look at the training, because I've been kind of kicking around the idea of doing my SHRM certification, and I've kicked that idea around forever. And every time I look at it, I always still come back to the fact that it's all about theory. It's all
very
about,
true.
you need to know the laws and understand some of the foundational components for
Absolutely.
sure. But what would be really helpful is if there was more practical experience, practical knowledge that was
Mhm.
being shared, that you can take that information. Because, like you said, I mean, I remember taking accounting courses and then doing accounting, not the
Was
same,
not.
not the same as
See,
how you
now
did it
that
in
I would have
college.
thought would have been more
You
sort of
would, right?
aligned,
And yet
right?
it's not,
Yeah.
and so because again, you have theory and then you have application. And I think
Yeah.
that those really kind of play into all of that. So I
Yeah.
agree, the blend, right? You need to have some of
Absolutely.
that, like the laws of HR. It's a very legal landmine
Yes.
when you're dealing with people. That 100% agree with. But then you have all of these other pieces that you really don't learn unless you're doing it every day
That's
and you
right.
have that practical experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's a combination of skills. So
Yes.
again, and I can just speak to it from like the change management perspective.
Yeah.
So when I go into organizations, a lot of times I'm working with the HR folks, which I
Yeah.
absolutely love. I'm not expecting them to be change management
Exactly,
experts,
right,
right? But
yeah.
I want to partner with them to collaborate with them and
Yes,
hopefully educate them. And by
right.
going through a project, an organizational change, a digital,
Yep,
change, whatever,
transformation or something, yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
they start to get more of those skills.
absolutely.
And that's just one
And now
piece
they've
of the
got that,
puzzle.
they can put that in their,
And their
yes,
toolkit,
in their
right?
toolkit, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and I think that's
Yeah.
really important because that's how we get better, smarter. I think there's also
Yes.
this misconception that people who sit at leadership levels, know everything and,
Yes.
and so that's why
What a
they're there.
terrible thing to put on them, right?
Yes, right, and they don't
Yeah.
know everything. They just are in most cases, they're generally good leaders, right? They're
Yes.
smart, maybe they're very strategic thinkers, maybe
Yes.
they're great communicators, but we have this misconception that maybe they know everything and they've got it all figured out,
Yeah,
and they don't,
I would agree.
Yeah, they're just
I
people.
think they're curious a lot of times too,
Yes, yeah.
and, I know you've heard me say this before too, but, and I don't know where I heard this from,
Uh-huh.
but years ago, someone told me, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah.
Use them accordingly."
I love that one. I think it's such an
You
important
know?
one, and we forget it all the time,
Mhm.
right? I mean, when even as much as we do training to say that in a communication you should, listen, and not, not be listening just so you can talk, but hear
Mhm.
what the other person is saying. Be present, be
Take it
mindful,
in.
and yet most of the time we're only kind of listening because we want to say what we want to say, so we're not really paying attention to what the other person is
Yeah.
is really saying to us, and so that advice is really important, that we do need to use our ears and eyes in accordance with
Yeah.
what we have. So no, I think it's a really good point. Well, I thought we could shift gears a little bit. So we've been talking about kind of like what we've heard and what we see out there. Let's talk about our own experience from strategy. So we're kind
Great.
of talking about strategy, but let's give our own real world experience of how we've applied strategic thinking and what we've done in different
Mhm.
organizations. Now, you and I have been a part of many mergers and acquisitions throughout our
Yes.
career, and then we've been a part of some pretty big change initiatives in other parts of our career. And so I thought, we could talk a little bit about how we approached those. And let's think about, our largest one was really at the city. And
Yes.
we put a lot of strategic focus around that because Holy cow, I had no idea what we were getting into when I showed up and then asked you to come and work with me and help me do this because, I couldn't have done that without you being by my side. Like we were just such great partners in what we had to do. But a big part of what we started out doing was really understanding the organization. And
That's right.
so, I think one of the things we did really well was to go and speak to every single agency within the city.
Yes.
And we learned what was going well, what
Mhm.
wasn't going well,
Mhm.
what would you like in the future. And that was really important because we used that later when we
Yes.
were deploying
Yes.
new processes and new technology. All that information that we learned during that time was really important for us because we incorporated that then into our communication strategy when
That's
we
right.
started to deploy all of
It all
that,
kind of rolled
right?
in together, didn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and let's talk a little bit because you actually brought this idea in there in how we put our strategy together was how did we do it? We did it with what? Sticky notes. So talk a little bit about that because that
Yeah.
was new for me and I still use it today. It's such a great strategy to do that, but talk about the sticky note approach and what we really kind of did with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember we would go into your office. So, again, at that time, I didn't know change management was
Right,
change
right.
management.
Yeah.
We just knew there was this massive change. We were moving into a new technology called Chronos at
Yes.
the time,
Yeah.
and from paper and post its.
Yeah.
And so you and
Well, and
I,
even more important than that, before that, we had just going through that reorganization, moving
yes.
out from the auditor's office and over to a
Oh,
newly
yeah.
formed Department of Finance, right? So we had two major things
Massive.
going on, a big organizational restructure as well as bringing new technology. And so I just wanted to set the stage on that
Absolutely.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think for us, we were kind of learning as we went. But to your
Yeah.
point, we would go out and we would talk to people. I love post-it notes, right? And I can't remember exactly what the story was, but that was a big accident. Like the
Yeah.
guy who invented post-its
Uh-huh.
did not mean to invent, like he was trying to invent something that was more permanent. But
Oh,
what I love about
interesting.
Post-its is you can move them
I love
around and
it.
you can shift
Yeah,
them around, and
absolutely.
nowadays there's so many different colors, right? So,
Yes, yes.
if you were putting together a change management strategy today,
Mhm.
like we were there, a lot of it, people were saying, "How are people gonna get trained?"
Yes,
That is one really important aspect, but that's
yes.
just one aspect,
Tiny piece of it all,
right?
really. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, very
So it
true.
was like, okay, who do we need to talk to? All the different agencies,
Yeah.
including safety,
Yes, yes, yeah.
sheriffs, police, and
Absolutely.
fire.
Yep.
And who are we going to talk to? What are we hearing?
Yes.
Again, how does that roll into communications? What are
Yeah.
we going to share with people?
Right?
When are we going to share it?
Yes.
It wasn't pretty, but it was like we started to pull stuff together, and it was
Yeah.
kind of the story and the strategy
Yes.
of how we were putting things
How do
together.
you go about doing that? Yeah.
Exactly. And
No, it's
so,
true.
we were writing things down and we were moving stuff around.
Yeah.
And when will we do training? How
Yep.
will we do training?
Yeah.
We had people standing next to time clocks,
Right. Yes. Yeah.
just
Very
cheering
innovative
people
thoughts
on.
of doing it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Very
Great. You did
true.
such a great job. That was
Yeah.
awesome. And then even just addressing some people weren't always 100% happy when you and I showed up,
No,
I
they were not.
remember.
That is very true.
Because word
Yeah.
got out pretty quickly that
Yep.
these 2 ladies and thankfully, Beth Mashan, the
Yes,
city
we had a great,
controller,
great person that we
great
had as a
leader.
leader, which was really very helpful for us for
That
sure.
that
Yeah.
was a big aha for me at the time,
Yes. Yep.
and
I agree.
now being in change management, I know, like, that's super important. You have to
So
have
important, that
a
executive
leader.
sponsor, right? And a leader who
Absolutely.
believes in you, because that
That's
was the
right.
key thing is that not only I think was Beth a really great leader, she believed in us and she
Yes.
trusted us.
Yes.
And that's so important, right? And when you're driving strategy, having an executive sponsor, but having someone who believes in what you're doing and
Yes.
trusts you enough to give you the latitude to make mistakes, because we
We
did,
did.
and we learned and we pivoted and we moved forward in those situations. But had we not had someone who believed and trusted us, she may not have, she may have just shut the whole program down and we'd have just gone back to status quo.
Right.
And, everything we had been putting all this effort behind would have been for naught.
Because
So
it wasn't a short period of
it was
time.
not a
This
short
was a
period of
long
time.
investment
Yeah.
of time. It took just under 5 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
which made a lot of sense back at
Absolutely.
that time
Yep.
because also to your point, there had been a shift from the
Yeah.
auditor's office to finance.
Yeah.
There also was a shift that we were going to introduce,
Yeah.
where it was a decentralized model in the way
Right.
that payroll was being done in HR, some
Yeah.
HR
Yeah.
functions. And so we were going to centralize.
Which was very uncomfortable for
Very
people.
uncomfortable. And
Yes.
we were also concerned about how the city constituents were going to
Absolutely.
hear that and react to that
That's
and
very
things like
true.
that as well. So,
No.
back to what you were saying, I think we probably, I don't know how many hours we looked at that whiteboard with all the
Yes.
Post-its,
A lot.
but it worked really well for us.
I thought
It
so.
was our informal change management strategy,
Yeah.
I would
And
say,
an
now
easy way to do
looking
a
at it.
project plan too, right? Because I am not a
Absolutely.
Microsoft project kind of person. Like
Yeah.
to me, that approach is very complicated.
Mhm.
When you brought in this idea of us being able to utilize the Post-its and really build out that strategy that way, it was simple but it was complex because we were able to hit all of the different areas. So we knew like who did we need to talk to in the agencies as well, right? Because we
Yes,
didn't just talk to leadership, we talked to the HR people
we
because
did.
HR was decentralized. We talked to the line managers. We
Yes.
talked to the people who, were responsible for doing this payroll function that we were going to take away from
Mhm.
them, and that was going to change a lot of people's jobs and the way that they were doing things. So
Yeah,
we really tried to look at it from not just a
all
top
the
down
angles.
approach, we did a bottom up as well.
Yes.
And another thing I think that we did is we identified who our detractors were going to be,
Mhm.
right? Because that's really important in strategy as well, right? Somebody's going to
Yes.
tell you that it's a bad idea, you're making a mistake, or they're going to be out there bad mouthing you or what you're trying to accomplish. And that can be really challenging. And so I think we tried to
Mm.
find them and embrace those people
That's a
and
really
utilize,
good
right?
point. And I think we did turn a few of those
I think we
around.
did. I think we turned a few frowns upside
Yeah.
down. And I would say, well, they may not
Uh,
have been our raving fans,
and
but
that's
I do
okay.
think that they
They
understood why
believed.
we were doing what we were
That's
doing
right.
and got behind it. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
They started to see, and that's a part of change too, is it's not always, you're not going to sell people on a
No,
change. You
no, you're
shouldn't.
not. Yeah.
You shouldn't spin it.
Yeah.
It should be, how are we going to help people understand the why? Back to what you
Yes.
were just saying.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that they can feel like they understand. They
Yeah.
feel respected because they've had a voice.
Right.
I remember in one of the trainings that we did, and someone was very vocally not happy.
Yeah.
And afterwards, we went and talked to this gentleman
Yeah.
and just said, we want to hear what you have to say. I
Yes.
think he just thought he was going to be vocal
I think
and,
so. Yeah.
just maybe, I don't know, sidetrack things or what have
Right.
you.
Yeah.
But I think when we talked to him, I think it took him by surprise,
I
number
think so
one.
too, that we were interested in his
That's
voice.
right.
Yeah.
And word did kind of get out,
It
like,
did.
which it does, right?
It does.
Especially in
Yes. When
a
you're doing
tight
good
knit
things,
community.
that is going to happen as well. So just as much as bad gets out, good equally gets out.
Yeah,
And it can change the tide for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And back to what you were saying, I think using kind of a timeline, because to your
Yes.
point, it
Yeah.
does have to align. All the things we were doing had to align with what was the end goal. And
Yes.
we had several end goals.
We did.
Obviously the new technology and teaching
Right.
people how to use it, but also the centralization and when
Yes.
does that need to happen by?
Right.
Again, being very strategic around
Yeah.
timing.
Yeah.
And then also we moved onto the same platform as Denver International Airport. So,
Yes.
and we had a few late nights out there as
Yes,
well.
we did.
Me looking up,
Yes.
talking to these big people, big
Right.
guys who are working
Yes.
on the tarmacs who were not happy. And remember, one of the things that they weren't happy about, I'll never forget this, was they said, we're big guys and you guys are lining up these time clocks and we
Yes.
cannot move around.
Yeah.
And so we removed every other time
Yeah.
clock
How
And
simple was that?
they were so happy.
And remember, one of the other things that they were complaining about too is that in those times, like a snow emergency or something, there was a particular
Mhm.
thing that they needed to do, and it was on the second page, and they'd have to swipe. And that took time
Yes.
away that they didn't feel like they had. So we just moved that
To the
to the
first
first page.
page.
And
Yeah.
those little things like that made a huge difference, I think, in what we were doing. Even you mentioned earlier when we installed time clocks, we didn't just put the time clocks up and then we sent out a communication and said, hey, here's how you use
Yeah.
it. We did spend time standing at those time clocks. We thought about the phone book approach. Remember, we had these
Yes.
little things that hung off of them so that
To
if you
tell
got there
people
and you
how to
didn't
do
know
it.
how to do it, well, that's
Mhm.
okay. You could
For
just
quick
pull up this little
reference.
quick reference guide
Mhm.
and that would help you there. And I think we tried to think about too the different skills because that was another piece as well. I remember later in my career, I was working with an organization and they had some of their workforce where reading was not a top skill of theirs, and in this particular case, these were, some whatever their role was for,
Mhm.
and where the part of the country that it was in, reading was not a strong suit for these people. So
Mm.
what we did is we put pictures up instead, and we put pictures up at
Awesome.
all of the places because we wanted to make sure that no one felt like, oh well,
Sort
we
of
had to put
singled
those
out.
here. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was really kind of thinking through all of that, which I think
Yeah.
is another key component on in all of that. And what I'll
Mhm.
say too is this was all done prior to bringing technology in. And I think that's a big mistake that
Huge.
happens frequently when you see these big change initiatives happening is that we bring the technology in and then we try to do all of these things. We
Around
didn't do
it.
that. We did
Yeah.
all of this work on the front end and really put a
Yes.
lot of effort behind. And we created partnerships with HR
We did.
in order to really support and be a part of all of this because we knew that they were going to need to be our champions within those agencies where those
Yes.
employees were concerned,
So
right?
we would share things with them earlier than
We
like the
did, and we
mass
had I think we did
rollouts.
either biweekly, meetings with them. We would present, and
Make
those were
sure.
hard meetings sometimes because they were not necessarily champions of what we were doing either. But we had to strategize with them because
Mhm.
through that centralization process, we were impacting people's jobs.
That's
We were
right.
creating new roles. But talk a little bit about what we did related to that, because we wanted to make sure not only did we create these new roles, we created training, we worked with Office of Economic Development, right? So talk a little bit about kind of how we looked at that from a strategy perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, talk about upskilling, right?
Yes.
Back to HR,
Yeah.
one of the biggest roles, and we did work closely with HR,
Yep.
was looking at what did people need to do to move into these new roles.
Yes,
And so we
exactly.
started to put processes behind it, which a lot of that was you. You were always like, we need to start with the process. We
I'm a
need to
big
start with the
proponent of
people.
process.
And
Yeah.
then the technology supports that. It
Yes.
does we don't lead with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but we did a lot of, and it was a lot of personalized. It wasn't,
Very
because you and I
personalized.
might sit
Yeah.
next to each other, but
Yeah.
I've done payroll before, you've done HR before, and
Yes.
it's a different skill set. It's we needed to do something more.
Yes.
Was on a grander scale. We had these new processes, so
Yeah.
we had to teach people what they were. We also asked people for feedback,
We did.
and
Yeah. We didn't
we
think
had
we knew
leads that
everything,
we
right?
kind of
Yeah.
promoted, and
Absolutely.
so it was, yeah, that was a whole transition
I think so.
as
And we
well.
created a whole career path for people because
Yes.
many of the people who worked on our team at that time have gone on to be VPs of HR
Yes.
and, or leading other organizations. And oh
CHROs at
my
other
gosh, how amazing is
organizations.
that? I mean,
Yes, I
and even
love
though I
that.
don't take credit for any of their success,
No,
I do feel like at least we
you cheer
helped
them on.
provide, yes, a little bit of a path to say, here's how you're going to get here. And we gave them that
We had a lot
opportunity.
of shining stars.
Oh my goodness, we were so blessed in what
Yeah.
we got to
Yeah.
do. I totally agree. Well, all of that to be said, I think, is that it is applying strategy, right? Because that was very
Absolutely.
strategic. And probably on the outside, I don't think you and I sat down and said, what's our strategy going to be, right? I think the way that we approached it is, what is happening? Why is it happening?
That's
Because there
right.
was a why behind this. This was not like you and I came in and we're like, hey, let's completely disrupt everything that's going on in the city today for our own
And
bidding,
upset
right?
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do this.
Yeah.
There were things that were happening that were changing at the city, and
That's
we were
right.
behind them, and we had to then go and initiate or drive those initiatives that were happening at a much higher level than us. And so
Mm-hmm.
as we looked at that, I think that's where we kind of sat down and we identified all the different components from training to communication to
Leadership.
leadership, everything,
Yeah.
and what we needed to do to really kind of put that all in place. That's strategy. So when we
That's
talk
right.
about that piece of it, and that's where for those HR business partners, that's where they could be thinking about that as well. So as they're
Mm-hmm.
partnering up with the leader of their team or department or organization,
Right.
that's a really critical role that they can play. And you and I
Absolutely.
didn't go to school for strategy, and we're not experts in it,
Yeah.
but we simply took fundamental concepts that are a part of human resources,
That's
honestly,
right.
and we applied that to how we were going to actually accomplish these things within the city at that time.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
like you said, I mean, we definitely had a lot of lessons learned along the
Oh my
way.
gosh, yes.
And so,
Some sleepless nights,
oh, yes.
some times where we were ready to throw in the towel and leave,
Where I
and just
came
say the
into your
heck.
office and said, I'm out of here.
Yes, and me running to leadership to say, "We can't do this, we've got to figure this out," and so and again, having that support from that executive
Yes,
sponsorship because
absolutely.
even Beth's boss, Claude, was a wonderful supporter of ours and, did a great job helping to promote upward for us to make sure that we had the support that we needed, and
Yeah,
so having those and identifying those champions is really
big
important when you're
time.
driving strategy,
Yeah.
I think. So, no,
Amen.
very exciting. So, Cindy, maybe you could give like two or three actionable insights or some takeaways that our listeners could maybe apply when especially if they're just
Mm,
starting out thinking about how can I be
yes.
strategic in my organization? What guidance would you give them?
Yeah. So the first thing is I would say be brave.
Yeah,
And I think the best way to be brave is to find a mentor, find someone, and it doesn't have to be an HR person
I like
inside
that.
of your
Yeah,
organization. As I mentioned,
yeah,
the VP of manufacturing definitely became a mentor to
right.
me.
Yeah,
So find a mentor
yeah,
who can kind of help you get your finger on the pulse of
yeah,
the business to learn the business a little bit more beyond HR.
yeah.
The other thing I would say is, SHRM really is a great
It is a great
resource.
resource. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
and
Yeah,
other groups that you can
yeah.
join. Find your community, find other
I love that.
people, and
Yes.
you can get on LinkedIn even and,
Yeah, that's right.
look and find other HR
Yep.
business partners, other HR people. You
Yeah.
can even post like there's a gal, I forget what her name is, but she had posted on LinkedIn to say, I'm new to human resources and I'm looking for
Oh,
basically my tribe.
I love
Anybody
that.
want to join me?
Oh, that's a great way
Like,
to do that. Yeah,
yeah, collaborate with me, share with me anything
absolutely.
that you have experienced. I'd greatly appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I love that approach to advocate for yourself,
Yes,
you
that is
know?
so important. I think
So, because
that's
there's a
really
lot
good.
to it.
There is so much to it, and it does take a community, it takes a
Hmm.
tribe, it takes and I think that's an important lesson in all of this as well is that, it's not all on the office of HR. It's
That's
not
right.
all on the CEO, the CFO, or it's really in a
Collective.
well-run organization, and some of the organizations you and I were blessed enough to be a part of, it was all of those together. It was the collective,
That's
right?
right.
So even when we would go through big changes, we all were there because we all brought a different
That's
perspective
right.
on what was happening and how we were going to handle it. And I think that that's really important, especially in organizations today that are trying to be a little more flat.
Hmm.
The voice of your lower level people or your middle managers or your line people or the front line, those voices are so critical. So make sure
Absolutely.
that somebody has a seat at the table representing them as
Yes.
executive leadership is just making these decisions. So
Amen.
yes, I love it. No,
So
great way to
good.
round out
Yeah.
our episode today. So, well, we would love to encourage all of our listeners out there to subscribe if you're
Yes.
enjoying this. Leave reviews, like we want to hear your
Let us
feedback.
know.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
And again, we're excited. In some future episodes here, we're going to bring on some HR leaders and some business leaders and just some amazing amazing women, because like we were talking about, sometimes the role of the CHRO or executive leadership, those women are the ones who are getting a lot of the airtime, and great. I celebrate those women.
Absolutely.
But there are some really incredible women who are doing some amazing things out there that
individual
don't get that.
contributors that we would
Yes.
love to bring on.
Love to bring
Yes.
on. And so if you would like to be a part of our podcast, we would welcome you to reach
Please.
out, and
Yeah.
we'll share how to get in touch with us. And certainly we'd encourage any of you too. Cyndi and I are both out on LinkedIn. Please, follow us, connect with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we hope you all have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the HR Her Resources podcast. We're so happy to have you with us on this journey. Music and production by Logan Misegadis of LJM Productions. We'd also like to thank our intern, Lauren Banas, for creating our logo and supporting our social media postings. If you'd like to connect with Logan or Lauren, you can find their information in the show notes. If you found value in our discussion and think someone else might as well, please follow and subscribe to our LinkedIn and share with a friend. Until our next episode, please take care and continue to support one another.